Ready to get a little mind blown today?
Always.
Well, today we're diving deep, really deep, into the mind of Lee Kuan Yew.
Ah, Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father of modern Singapore. Fascinating guy.
Yeah, and you might be thinking, like, Singapore, isn't that just a tiny little island? But trust me on this one. Back in 2004, this guy sat down with Charlie Rose and laid out some serious predictions about the future.
And a lot of what he said is happening right now. It's kind of spooky, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So we've got excerpts from that interview, and we're going to break it all down for you.
We're talking about everything from the rise of China and Islamic terrorism to the future of America.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Let's start with something that's been on everyone's minds for, like, forever. Islamic terrorism. I mean, a lot of people see it as a reaction to, like the Palestinian conflict or the war in Iraq.
Right, this sort of thing that makes you say, okay, I can see why they're upset.
Yeah, but Lee Kuan Yew, he had a totally different perspective. He argued that you actually got to go way back to really get it, like all the way to the 1970s.
Yeah, the 1970s oil crisis. That's where this story really starts.
Okay, so, how so?
Well, think about it. All of a sudden, there's this massive influx of petrodollars flooding into the Muslim world. And a lot of that money ended up funding the spread of Wahhabism.
Wahhabism.
A very, very strict fundamentalist interpretation of Islam.
So it's kind of like pouring gasoline on a fire?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It created fertile ground for, well, radicalization. And then you have figures like Osama bin Laden who are able to tap into that, that growing sense of religious fervor.
And he gives this really chilling example of how Singapore, this tiny little island nation, ends up becoming a target for terrorist attacks.
Oh, yeah.
Not because they did anything to provoke them, but just because they supported the U.S.
Just because they were friends with America and allowed American ships to use their ports. It's crazy.
Yeah, like, can you imagine they uncover plans for 7 car bombs, each one twice the size of the Oklahoma City bomb, all set to go off in December 2001.
And the reason?
They just happened to be on the wrong side of this ideological conflict.
And it really highlights the indiscriminate nature of terrorism. It's not always about, a specific grievance or particular event.
So it's like nowhere is safe.
Pretty much.
So this kind of leads into another fascinating part of the interview where Lee Kuan Yew talks about the Iraq War.
Oh, this is interesting.
You'd think, coming from his perspective, he'd be totally against it.
Right. Don't get involved.
Yeah. But he actually offers this really nuanced view. Like, okay, the war, yeah, it might be creating more terrorists in the long run, but, he says, it's actually benefited Southeast Asia in the short term.
Short-term gain. Potentially long-term pain.
Okay, so how so?
Well, he mentions this terrorism expert, Rohan Gunaratne, who actually moved to Singapore because he was convinced that Southeast Asia was going to be like the next big target. Yeah. But then the Iraq War starts, and all of a sudden all these terrorist resources get diverted to the Middle East.
So it's like the war accidentally created a shield for Southeast Asia.
Yeah, but like at a massive cost,
Yeah.
right? All those lives lost.
So many unintended consequences.
Exactly. And it really shows you just how interconnected everything is. One event in one part of the world can have these ripple effects that you just don't see coming.
So what did Lee Kuan Yew think was the best way to combat terrorism?
Well, he actually points out that the U.S. and Europe have very different perspectives on this.
Really?
Yeah, European leaders at the time, they were really focused on resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Like they saw that as the key.
Yeah, they felt that was the way to win over moderate Muslims and really isolate the extremists. And they were pretty critical of America's role, or lack of a role, in that process. They saw it as a root cause of the problem.
So it's not just about, like, military action. It's about addressing the underlying political issues as well.
Exactly. And it shows that even back then, there were all these different schools of thought on how to tackle this global challenge.
And we're still having those same debates today.
Yeah, it's a problem that just won't go away.
Okay, so we've talked about terrorism, but Lee Kuan Yew, he also had some pretty amazing predictions about the global economy. Like, he was totally convinced that China and India were going to become economic powerhouses.
Oh, he was way ahead of the curve on that one.
Yeah, back in 2004, he was predicting that China would overtake Japan as the world's second largest economy by 2020.
And he was right.
And he was saying India could be a potential superpower within 50 years.
Like the dominant force in the world. He even compared it to the way things were before the Industrial Revolution.
Right, when China was calling the shots.
Exactly. And it makes sense, right?
How so?
Well, these countries have massive populations, growing middle classes. They're becoming more integrated into the global market every day.
So it wasn't just some wild guess.
No, he was looking at the data.
So what did he think this would mean for for smaller countries like Singapore?
Well, he knew it was going to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, how do you compete with giants like that?
He basically said, look, Singapore has thrived by arbitraging on inefficiencies.
Arbitraging on inefficiencies, what does that even mean?
Basically, they were the middleman.
Okay.
They took advantage of the fact that China and India weren't very efficient at producing and trading goods.
So they swooped in and made a killing.
Yeah, but as these economies mature, that advantage is going to disappear.
So what's the plan?
Adapt or die. He believed that Singapore could, leverage its unique strengths, its strategic location, skilled workforce, strong institutions, and become a hub for innovation and investment, like a global meeting point.
Like a mini Silicon Valley, but in Asia.
Exactly. A place where East meets West and ideas can flow freely.
It's pretty amazing how he is able to see these global shifts coming and prepare Singapore for them.
Visionary leadership.
Totally.
And a little bit of luck, probably.
So, one thing that really struck me is, he even said if he were a young man today, he wouldn't necessarily go into politics in Singapore. Right. He thought there were so many other opportunities for success. It's a pretty bold statement from a guy who, dedicated his life to public service.
Yeah, that's Lee Kuan Yew for you. Always thinking ahead, always pushing the boundaries, always challenging the status quo. He felt that America was just too focused on, imposing its own model on the world.
Really?
Yeah, and not sensitive enough to the apprehensions of other nations.
Apprehensions, they were afraid of America.
Not necessarily fear, but more like a sense of unease.
Okay.
About America's motives and intentions. He thought America needed to be more willing to, listen and engage with other nations on their own terms, not just dictating terms.
And did he have any suggestions for how America could change its approach?
He actually used Deng Xiaoping as an example.
Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah, the guy who basically put China on the path to economic success single-handedly.
Yeah, wasn't he the one who opened up China to the world?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lee Kuan Yew really admired Deng's his pragmatism and his willingness to learn from others. He tells this story about how Deng visited Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia back in 1978.
Okay.
And he was just blown away by their economic progress.
Wow.
It was a real turning point for him.
Really?
And it basically led to China embracing, market reforms and really opening up to the world.
So he's saying that America should be more like China.
Not exactly. He's saying that America could learn from Deng's approach.
Okay.
Be less focused on imposing your own model and more open to understanding different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things.
That's interesting because he also draws a parallel between the potential economic dominance of China today and the historical dominance of China, way back when.
Before the Industrial Revolution.
It's like he's saying, hey, this isn't new. The world has seen shifts in power before. It's all about how you manage those shifts.
Right. Adapt and evolve.
So it's not just about economics either, right? He's talking about culture too.
Yeah, he acknowledges the appeal of American culture.
Like Hollywood movies, blue jeans, McDonald's.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
But he also criticizes aspects of it, like consumerism and its impact on the environment.
He was pretty outspoken about America's reliance on fossil fuels.
Oh, yeah, he really called them out on that.
Big time.
Mm-hmm.
He specifically criticized America for its lack of leadership on alternative energy. It's almost like he's challenging America to live up to its ideals, to be a better global citizen.
Okay, so he's got some tough love for America, but what about the rest of the world? What did he see as the key skills for success in the 21st century?
Well, education was huge for him.
As you'd expect.
Yeah. But he wasn't just talking about rote learning or memorizing facts and figures.
Yeah.
He was really advocating for a global outlook.
Yeah.
He urged young people to, learn English as a world language, and also to gain an understanding of Chinese language and culture.
So it's about more than just learning a language. It's about developing a global mindset.
Absolutely. It's about being able to understand and appreciate different perspectives.
Empathy.
Exactly. He even talks about how Singapore itself has had to adapt its governance model.
Yeah.
as its citizens have become more worldly and cosmopolitan.
Interesting. So even a country with like a strong sense of national identity, it still needs to be flexible.
It needs to adapt to a changing world.
Makes you wonder, what kind of world are we creating for future generations? Like what values do we want to instill in them?
It's a big question.
Yeah, no kidding.
And Lee Kuan Yew's insights definitely make you think about it.
They definitely make you think. He doesn't give us all the answers, but he does make you challenge some of your assumptions about how the world works, about the future.
Speaking of assumptions, Lee Kuan Yew also had some really interesting observations about America's obsession with minimizing casualties in war.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he argued that this focus on, saving American lives, while understandable, it can sometimes lead to a kind of distorted view of conflicts.
Oh, interesting.
Like he uses the Iraq War as an example.
Okay.
And he points out the stark contrast between, all the attention that's paid to American deaths
Right.
versus, the tens of thousands of Iraqi casualties.
So we only care when it's our own people.
Not necessarily, but he was suggesting that this hypersensitivity to American casualties, it might actually prevent us from effectively addressing these really complex global challenges.
So it's like we're so focused on protecting our own that we kind of lose sight of the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this ties into his broader point that America needs to find a more sustainable way to exert its influence in the world.
Okay.
He wasn't advocating for like isolationism or anything.
Right.
But he was calling for a more nuanced approach.
Okay.
One that balances American interests with the needs and perspectives of other nations.
So what would that actually look like?
Well, he suggests that America could learn from the British experience in Iraq.
The British experience in Iraq.
Back in the 1920s.
Oh, wow, okay.
They went in, they removed the threat, and they got out as quickly as possible.
Interesting. So it's about choosing your battles wisely.
Exactly. And recognizing that imposing your will through military force isn't always the answer.
Sometimes you got to be more strategic, more subtle.
And you got to understand that America's role in the world is evolving.
Just like the world itself is evolving.
Right, and that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. They force you to grapple with these.
I'm left with this question. What are the most important lessons we can learn from his life? What wisdom can we take away from this guy, this incredible leader, and apply to our own lives?
I think it's about constantly adapting.
Being flexible.
Always learning, always growing, and never being afraid to challenge your assumptions.
Because the world is changing faster than ever before.
And if we want to thrive in this new landscape, we got to be willing to change with it.
Well said. So, what resonated with you most from this deep dive into the mind of Lee Kuan Yew? What surprised you? What made you want to learn more? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your insights with us on social media, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.